My man, it's Brooklyn. Everybody knows you as Brooklyn. David Gamali. Is that Italian?
That is Italian, yes.
I could tell. I could tell on the accent, Italian. So, man, so good to have you on the show. And your name is Brooklyn, Brooklyn Free Man, right, on TikTok.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we're gonna have all your links in the description, and go follow this man. And before we get into talking to Brooklyn, I got to tell you how I came across this guy. As y'all, I'm very rarely on social media, new to TikTok. TikTok is new for me, and I stopped on this guy, and I saw him, speaking, and what attracts me and creates a connection for me is seeing someone who is transparent, who is vulnerable, and who is in solution, and also using social media and going videos comes across as therapeutic, for us. It helps us. And one thing, David, I really liked was that captured me is people commenting, these trolls that will, just jump in just to say something to try to charge us up. And I love your platform and how you respond to them is that you just love them and you say, hey, that's one strike. We're going to let you stay on here, but my page, Brooklyn's page, is a safe place.
Right.
It's a safe place where to help people, and I see how the comments turn. And I've seen some people actually apologize. Say, my bad, just hanging out. So that's great. Brooklyn, welcome to the show, and it's so good to have you.
Thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate you having me on.
And you got to give your famous tagline of how you start your TikTok lives out.
Well,
hello,
I start out
hello,
saying,
beautiful people.
Hello, beautiful people. There you go.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's jump into this, and kind of start with your story. You're a gentleman who was incarcerated for 28 years. And what happened? I mean, how did all this happen?
Well, okay, so I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, and in 1991 I got myself into some trouble, right, due to some really, really bad decisions and my addictions and that type of stuff. And so I had 2 felony convictions from a federal case in New York. When I got out of prison then in 1993, I relocated to California, right, in March of 1994. So about less than 85 days later, I had committed a robbery. I went into a Bank of America with a note, and I committed what they call a note pass bank robbery. Right, so no weapon. The reason why I got so much time, because that case actually only carried 5 years maximum. But I fell under the very, very brand new 8-day-old law, the California three-strike law. So because I had 2 prior felony convictions and I committed a new conviction, I was eligible for the three-strike law, and they ended up giving me 25 years to life. So I was incarcerated from March of 1994 until April of 2022. So it was a stretch.
Walk me through the feeling of when you were sentenced and they told you how long you were going to serve.
Well, I had 2 feelings at the same time, right? So initially at my sentencing, there was no one in the courtroom. I was the only person in the courtroom, and the only person that was there that was with me was my lawyer. And I have to say that my best interest was not his concern. So I felt really, really alone. I felt abandoned, and I was facing this huge prison sentence. I known at that point that I was going to spend most of my life in prison. Then I remember they took me back to the county jail. They took me back to the county jail, and they put me on a special transport going to San Quentin. Because I was what they called a problem child, right? You know what I mean? So now I was a problem child with this lengthy prison sentence, life actually. And I remember becoming so angry, you know what I mean? So very, very angry. And at the time, I felt like I was completely and utterly shortchanged by everybody and everything in this world, you know? And when I realize now that was just fallacious thinking. You know what I mean? I was where I was because of my decision making. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was a lot of contributing factors that led me to make these poor decisions, right? You know what I mean? But ultimately, it was my own decisions. You know what I mean?
Right.
But to answer your question, I was very, very angry. And I started to understand that my anger was rooted in fear, right? You know what I mean? So
Right. That's right.
I had I had this horrible, deep fear that I was just abandoned, that I was
Right.
going to be on
I
this
can relate.
planet, on this earth alone, without love, without people, without human contact, without anything. So that was kind of the emotional turmoil I was going through on that day, anyways.
Well, let's back up a little bit before that, and that was beautiful, and that's what I love about you. And for people who are watching and listening to this, um, that's what that's where the attraction is and the connection is for me listening to you, because you just naturally just shared accepting your role in the situation.
Right.
You accepted your role, and these are decisions that we made. It was choices that we made. But a lot of times these decisions and choices we made were sometimes tools that were passed down to us that we didn't know. So let's back up before that. What was David's life like as a child? I mean, what was that like? Because you didn't, as a 3-year-old, 6-year-old, you weren't dreaming to rob a bank. I mean, you
Right,
didn't
right,
dream to be
right.
an addict. You didn't, me either. I didn't think about that. But what was it that triggered all this as a child?
Well, I was raised by criminals and heroin addicts, right?
Mm,
My parents were heroin addicts, right? So um, they, they did the best they could. They loved us. I wasn't robbed of affection. However, I was certainly not socialized correctly. Right? You know what I mean?
right.
My parents were also criminals. My on my mother's side of the family, all of her brothers were hardcore criminals that spent multiple years in prison. One of her brothers very, very involved in organized crime. My father, as well, was a criminal, right? You know what I mean? He was in the carpet business, but he was a thief. He would steal from his employers. I grew up in a very, very criminally minded neighborhood, so remember, I grew up in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, right? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
definitely, I was a kid in the 70s and I came up in the 80s, but that was kind of like the heyday of the American Mafia. So in my neighborhood, there was like 10 mafia clubs, maybe like in a 6 block area. So
Yeah.
all of my friends, all my peers, we all kind of wanted to be in the mafia. We looked up to these guys. These guys were millionaires in these middle class neighborhoods, right? You know what I mean? Like they
Yeah.
they were very, very flamboyant. There was this lifestyle that was attractive for me. And then when I think about it now, it's kind of this Robin Hood attraction, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like one of these guys that they're not really bad guys. They're just going out and they're hustling and you know what I mean? And they're giving back and they're doing all of those type of things. So I mean, not to make any excuses for my behaviors, but as a child, right? I grew up where drugs were the norm, right? You know what I mean? Where criminality was the norm, right? And it was generational. It wasn't just me. It was my parents. It was my uncles. It was my grandparents. One of the earliest memories that I have, my parents used to take us to Coney Island every weekend. We'd spend the weekend on the beach. And my siblings were playing down by the water, and I was sitting on a blanket with my parents. And my father had put his arm behind his back, and my mother was injecting him with heroin. I was about 7 or 8 at the time, right? And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, do these people think that I'm stupid? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's like, so it caused an emotional problem in me, right? Because I didn't know how to communicate to my parents or to other people, like, look, there's something that's wrong here. There's something that's out of place. I wasn't a normal kid. You know what I mean? And it bothered me. I just didn't know how to communicate at the time. But
Yeah,
that's
but
really
you were
kind of
just using
where all
it
of
was
this
the
started.
tools that were given to you. The tools that were passed down from generation to generation is all they knew. So those tools were given to you. And I can totally relate in a whole different world of you growing up around these mobsters and all that. And you said that you looked up to them. You know what I mean? You thought that this is the way we live. This is what we're supposed to do. And those men, were kind of like your dads. Those were your mentors, and they were teaching you how to
Absolutely.
live. Same thing in my story with a whole different taste. I grew up in the country clubs in the men's locker room with these very successful businessmen, but they taught me how to drink. They taught me how to gamble, and they taught me how we're supposed to be a man. And then they also, as you can relate, these men taught us how to die. They taught us how to die. Beautiful. I could totally relate to that from both sides of the street. So as you're incarcerated and you're talking about, how angry, you are. And of course, drugs and alcohol are a big part of your life. We're chasing these visible things to try to make our invisible problems go away. You're incarcerated, you're angry. Walk me through incarceration of when the bright light turned on and Brooklyn was born. Something happened, and you are the person that God chose to say it's stopping right here, right now.
Right. Well, so that was actually a very long process, right? Because I was
Yes, me too.
incarcerated. Yeah, I was incarcerated in 1994. I had, had a life sentence. In California, they had what they call truth in sentencing when it came to lifers. That meant that you was going to die in prison. There was very, very little opportunity for me to get out of prison before 2015. So I was incarcerated in 94. So out of my fear, right, out of my fear of being unsafe and stuff like that, what I started to do was get involved in gang activity, right? You know what I mean? So I literally jumped in. I joined probably one of the, most notorious prison gangs in the country, right? You know what I mean? And I did it for a sense of safety, but not just a sense of safety, but also for a sense of belonging,
Yeah.
for a sense of camaraderie. You know what I mean? For I knew that my life was now going to be mostly prison, and I was acclimating what I was doing, but I was acclimating in such a horrible, horrible way. And so what happened was is that I was doing these years and years of things, right, that was actually starting to eat away at my shame and my guilt. I started to really, really examine myself because you've been in the prison cell. You
Yeah.
have a lot of time to think, right? You know what I mean? You have a lot of time to think. And what
Which
I
is
was doing
dangerous.
was it's dangerous. It's dangerous. I was trying to reconstruct my past by examining it, right? And I was looking at all of these behaviors and all of these decisions that I had made, and I started to really, really resent myself. When I started to resent myself, there's two things that happen with me. One is I could take that anger and make it internal, and I'll go into a depression where I don't think that there's any reason to live, right? And what I would normally do is I would turn it into anger and then lash it out at the world. So I became this hugely angry, very, very miserable, kind of like, you know what I mean? Like hate the world, F the world type of guy. And that's never really been me. I'm kind of extroverted. I like people. You know what I mean? And I was even becoming more, I was even getting pushed away from who I really, really was throughout these years of this ridiculous violence and these, prison politics and all of this stuff. And then something happened. I was in it, and when I say something happened, every time someone says that, that's a miracle, right? So a miracle took place for me. And I remember I was in a prison cell. I was in a prison cell, and I was living with this guy named Wrath, right? And his name, right? His name fit his personality. And like he was one of these true, very, very dangerous, kind of psychopathic type of guys, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I've
And
seen
he
them.
was getting high on speed, right?
Mm.
And I didn't use speed because it would make me paranoid. And being paranoid in that environment is really, really dangerous. So I was using heroin, and I was actually upset with this guy because he's high on speed. and he's painting the walls, right? You know what I mean? It's like 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? He's like, well, you know, I'm fixing to sell up for you, and so I'd be really really angry at this dude. And I tell him, look, tomorrow morning, man, you better get me paper heroin. You know, you're running around the freaking cell at 3 o'clock in the morning painting the cell, right? You know what I mean? I would like some heroin to be able to deal with you, right? You know what I
Right.
mean? It's
Right.
seriously what I was thinking.
Right.
So he gets me this paper heroin the next morning at breakfast, right? And I go out and I ask to borrow a needle, right? You know, to inject his heroin. Right? And there's like, I mean, this needle's been passed around to every white and every Mexican and thing. Right? I mean, this is a filthy, disease-ridden needle, right? And I'm sure you're aware. So these are like prison jury rig kind of needles, right? So there's the needle, but instead of a plunger, it has like a binky, what they call a binky. It's a little plastic thing where you could actually push it in, and it's tied on by thread, right? So it was thread that was tied on. So I'm injecting this, and somehow or another, the needle malfunctioned. So the binky wasn't working. There was air getting into it, and I had hit the vein, and blood was running up the barrel of the needle. And I'm screaming to my cellie, get a Q-tip, get a Q-tip, get a Q-tip, right? And he took a Q-tip and actually pushed the blood back into my arm, right? And I remember in that moment, I'm like, what are you doing? Like this scene was so disgusting and so horrid, right? And I told myself in that moment, that I will never get high again. I will never commit another crime, right? You know what I mean? And I will never use drugs ever again, right? You know what I mean? And I said, that's it. And I knew in that moment that I wasn't strong enough to be able to commit to that, right? I needed help, right? You know what I
Right.
mean? And now remember, I'm in Kern Valley, right? I'm in like one of the most violent prisons, right,
Rock and
in
roll.
all of
Rock
California.
and
Yeah, I
roll.
mean it's like yeah, I'm in that spot, right? You know what I mean? And there's certain requirements that's expected of me to even be able to survive. There's two sets of rules. You have the administration rules, which really mean nothing, and then you have the gang rules, which means your life, right?
Yeah.
And so now I have to make a decision to turn away from that life, right? You know what I mean? In an environment where everybody's involved in that life on my own. And what I did is I asked God. I asked God to forgive me, right? Forgive me for my sins, right? And to help me through what I needed to do. And he said yes. He forgave me in that moment. He did. He
I
forgave me in
love
that
it.
moment. And until this day, which is, well over 12 years, right? Well over 12 years, I've been able to stick with that commitment. You know what I mean? And so what happened with me was a miracle, right? An absolute miracle that came to my life. And the truth of the matter was that miracle came because I no longer wanted to live the life that I was living. Clearly wanted to stop. I did not want to be a junkie. I did not want to be a criminal, and I did not want to hurt people ever again. And only
Wow.
through the grace of God, I've been able to do that.
That is beautiful. The transformation of and the places, for everyone where we find God, Christ. You know what I mean? And so once that's my story too. That's where I found them too. I
Right?
found them in a 4x9 cell, staring at the bricks, and I can totally relate to that. And we'll get into some prison talk, because I know people watching this, what you just shared there, they're moved. They're moved, but there's also questions, and I'll bring those up. But from that transformation, from that day forward, what did you do to get, because we want more. We when we're out there in the noise, you know what I mean? We want more. We want more. But once that transformation for me, I wanted more. I wanted more of God. I wanted more of that spiritual feeling. And so what did you do to build that feeling while you were
Well, I mean,
incarcerated?
I've always had a prayer life, right? So I've been a believer since I'm a child. I've been
Okay.
a believer of God since I'm a child, It was,
You just
I
weren't
mean, I
riding
just
with them.
right, exactly. That's what happened.
Yeah.
What happened was is that I had turned my back on God as a young child. I not turn my back on him, but I put him on the back burner. I'm like, look, I'm going to do whatever it is that I want, and later in the game, we'll reconcile, right?
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
we'll hook up.
I'll come and see you later, right? You know what
Right.
I mean? So I had started to pray quite a bit. Right? I remember right before my mother passed away, I was in high desert, and she was sick, and I didn't know it. She was actually dying. She had lung cancer, and I didn't know it. I talked to her on the phone. And she goes, David, she goes, pray for me. I said, okay, Mom. She goes, no, 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 David, pray for me. I said, okay, Mom, I promise you I will. Right? You know what I mean? And she was insistent. My mother had a power over me, right? You know what I mean? Like when
Yeah.
she insisted on something, that was it, right? You know what I mean? And she's like, no, David, pray for me. I said, Ma, okay, I promise I will. Right. And what happened was that I had broken my mother's heart so many times and I had broken so many promises to her. I says, look, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to keep this promise. And I started praying. Right. I started praying to God. And when I think about it now, it's really significant. I wasn't praying for me. I was praying for my mom. I was praying for my nephews. I was praying for other people. I was really, really praying for others. And I want to say that there was a sense of calmness that came into me. And I've never really been a calm person. I've always been an over anxious
Yeah.
person, a kind of hyper vigilant person. But I started to relax a little bit. I started to be a little bit more confident that everything was going to be okay. You know what I mean?
Oh, I totally get it.
And yeah, right. I started to feel a little bit better. And don't get me wrong, it was a slow transformation because it had to be because of my environment. Now remember, I'm an active gang member at this time,
Right.
right? Like my job is to move drugs, right? You know what I mean? Earn resources for the gang, politic on people, and actually have them removed if they didn't follow all rules uh, to the T.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I'm literally trying to tend two fires at the time,
Yeah.
right? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And we all know that that's impossible,
Yeah.
right? You know what I mean? So it was a slow transformation, but now I also had a drug problem, right? So I had access to a lot of drugs because again, that was part of my responsibility as a gang member. So I knew I needed help with the drug problem. So at that time in California, there was no rehabilitation, but they always had a 12-step program. They've always had that, right? You know what I mean? And so I go to sign up to this 12-step program, and sure enough, it's being ran by another gang, right? Like that's like the only people that are there. They control the list. They control who comes in there, who comes out, and who's going on in there. Um, I knew them. So I went to them and I'm like, look, man, I'm trying to get clean. I'd like to come in and partake in the 12-step program. And they told me, they used to call me New York, right? They're like, New York, we're not doing that over here, brother. You know what I mean? That's not what we're doing over here. You know what I mean? We're doing things. And you know what I mean? He goes, so this is what I could do.
So they were they
I
were
got
they
some
were the
books. I
plug.
got some literature.
They were the plug.
Say that
They
again.
were bringing dirty 12 step in.
Well, they were. I mean, they were literally moving weapons and moving drugs and having again. Because what's the yards in California, level fours, a lot of people are separated. There'll be people on that yard that you actually don't even see unless you get to medical together or you come to NA or you go to church or any of those type of things. So it's being utilized as a gang resource, you know. So what they told me was they're like, look, man, we can't invite you in here, right? We got things we got to do. But what I can do, and I knew this guy personally, he goes, I have some literature. You know what I mean? Maybe you can read this stuff because one thing about prisoners, they're strong readers, right? They read a lot, right? I mean, so I had an excellent reading comprehension. So he goes, there's some literature, and he gave me this book. He gave me this book called the 12-Step Workbook,
Yeah.
right? It was a workbook. and it was all this step work. And the book actually asks you questions, and you answered them. And as I became familiar with that book, I started to see the spiritual principles in it. So now I'm praying, and now I have this 12-step workbook that I'm literally recognizing spiritual principles, and they're combining, right? So I'm getting stronger. I'm getting stronger in my resolve, right, to actually make this change, even amongst the environment I'm living in, right? Even with that, I'm starting to become stronger in my resolve to make and maintain this change in my life.
Wow. Wow. So God's using ungodly people to do his work. Yeah, that's real, right? He's using
It's real.
ungodly
It's
people
absolutely
to do his work to transform you. That is incredible. So the question you've answered the question I was going to ask earlier, and I know how it works too. But people are like going, how do they get drugs, into the behind the walls? I mean, how did they do that? And like the needle, how was the needle made? I mean, how was that from when people would go get their diabetic shots? I mean, is that how they would get that?
mostly the drugs that come into prison is mostly through visits, right? So people get visits from their families. They'll make a pass while they're in the visiting room, and they will use the man purse. And there's also secondarily, and probably less frequently, the cops also bring in drugs,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
that's very
the
common.
cops bring in a lot of contraband, but it's usually not so much drugs,
Hmm.
right? So a lot of cell phones, a lot of weapons, that type of stuff. But the drugs themselves come in mostly through visits, right? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? So, and in California, it is a huge business, right? We're talking about a lot of money, right? Because the markup of of the drugs in prison is huge,
yeah,
right? So they're making a lot of money on it. The needles mostly come from exactly what you said there, from diabetic needles when the nurse turns around and makes a move, and you know what I mean. So, but sometimes also with the package of drugs will come one or two syringes, right? They'll cut them down to size, try to make them a little bit smaller. Usually, just only about that large. You know what I
right,
mean? Very very small.
right.
They'll come in with the thing, but mostly the outfits come from, like you said, from the nursing department, and drugs come in for the most part through visiting.
Right. Well, back to life at incarcerated, and something happened, as you shared earlier, and you've had this awakening. I love how you said that, is that the way your faith grew and the way that your spirituality is, I can relate to. I was my deal is, you've heard that, I was in this tank that blew me away. And you're right. There's a lot of people who read, a lot of very smart people that are locked up, right? We're all smart. We had to be smart to juggle all our lives. And, but, I was in a tank that no one could read. That's what just blew me away. So, and when I was reading to my cellie and then to all the inmates, something happened because I was getting out of self. It wasn't about me. And I had this peace because I was helping someone else, expecting nothing in return. You found that change through praying for other people. That's how you found getting out of self, right? And so as you're doing this and growing, what next? I mean, you still got a lot of time. I mean, you still got a lot of time to serve, and I'm assuming you were like me. You didn't become one of these jailhouse, preachers. It was like, yeah,
No,
I didn't either,
no, I
because I
mean,
didn't know what I was talking about.
well, it was very, well, I mean, it was difficult because I had to keep up a front
Yeah,
for my own safety.
right.
I couldn't, I mean, the gang membership in California is for life, right? There's no like, hey, look, guys, thank you for your service, but I'm better now, and I'm gonna go ahead and go over here and do my own thing.
Yeah,
That's not allowed.
yeah.
So I had to keep up this front. In fact, I had got transferred to the worst. I got transferred to Pelican
Oh,
Bay.
wow.
I was in Pelican Bay. I was like literally, I was at the what they call the end of the road.
Yeah,
There was no worse place that they could put you. And what's ironic about that is I loved it,
yeah. What do you
right?
mean by that?
Because
What do you mean by
what
that?
happened Well, because what happens is that when I go to the shoe, they would single cell me.
What's a shoe? I know
They
what a
would put
shoe is,
me.
but for our
Okay, the shoe is like security housing
Mhm.
units. So in it's the whole,
Right,
right? It's the
right,
box, right? What you guys call the
right,
box, the whole solitary confinement, all of those type of things. In California, they have three. One in Tehachapi, one in Corcoran, and one, very, very famous shoe in California is Pelican Bay. That's where all the big boys go. That's where they have all of the outdated gang members and all of these high profile guys, right? So I ended up in Pelican Bay, and I got there around 2013, and I remember in 2015, a bunch of administrators from Sacramento, which is the capital of California, came into the prison, and this is what they said: the doors are opening. I remember the CC3. I forgot what his name was. I was actually thinking about it this morning, but I remember, and he said it like that, and he used his hand gesture. He goes, "The doors are opening." And he goes, "But this is what we need you guys to do, right? One, you need to back away from the game. Two, you need to start to really, really do some rehabilitation we're going to make available to all of you guys, right? You know what I mean? And three, he said, you're going to have to really, really gain some insight." And I didn't understand what that meant at the time, what insight truly meant. I understood what the word meant, but I didn't really, really know what it really, really meant. So this is 2015. I had been clean going on 3 years now. I was able to navigate, keep up that front without actually harming anyone, which is a difficult job. But now they're offering freedom. Now I have the opportunity to get out of prison, right? And I remember when they left, because they came, I mean, a bunch of people came, right? And when they left, and I remember asking permission, I was assigned to someone who was overseeing, um, all our gang activity. Right? You know what I mean? And I said, "Look, man, what do you think?" Because they offer what they call a drop down program, right? So what they wanted you to step away from the gang. They were going to reintegrate you back into the main line and then start to get you involved in rehabilitation. And there was two ways to do it: one through the main line, and one through what they call SMY, right? You know what I mean? To completely non-active dropout. And so I remember asking permission, can I, go through this dropout program? And he told me, "Are you kidding me?" He goes, "You signed up for this, right? You signed up for this. There's no." And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, you know what? I'm sorry, right? You know what I mean? I'm sorry. I'm gone,
yeah,
right? I'm gone. You know what I mean? And the pride bothered me a little bit because I didn't want anybody, even gang members, to be like, "Oh, New York is not a good dude. He's a coward. He's running," all of that type of stuff. But that was a small part of the back of my brain with the overriding part. Like, look, man, you need to do the right thing.
right.
If you want to change your life, here's the opportunity. You have an opportunity to go home. And so I put in a request to go to the law library, which is normally a place that people communicate.
Yeah,
And I put in a request. The next day, they were taking me over to the law library, and I told them, "Listen, I'm done. I'm done. I want out of here." You know what I mean? And they said, "Okay." They literally took me from where I was in D building. They took me to C building, where they housed the people that had done the dropouts, and I was out of that prison in 60 days. And I got to what they call a dropout yard. And when I got there, there was all of these lifers, all guys like me that been down 25, 30 years, that was making a change in their life. And they had all these programs running, right? I mean, 12-step programs, CGA programs, substance abuse programs, right? Emotional intelligence programs, right? College, right? You know what I mean? I became a certified dog trainer. California, I have to admit, really, when they made a decision to let lifers go, they really started to offer some real rehabilitation. And I just submerged myself in that. I mean, just went in, dove in, and loved it and enjoyed it. You know what I mean? I was actually healing
You
myself.
you feel
You
like
know?
you had a purpose.
I had a
And
purpose. I had a
and one
purpose.
thing is, because I was going to ask you the question, that when your spiritual awakening happened, okay, you were still struggling living with this double life. So now you, for the first time, you're experiencing spiritual warfare, right? And
Right.
so,
Right.
and as a result of continued prayer in your story, God blessed your game. He says, you know what? It's time. I'm going to put you in a safe place with like-minded people that
Straight
y'all
up.
are both, y'all are all shooting at the same target finally.
Right. Right. And you know what's crazy? And I have this story that really brought me back to the
Yeah.
church, right? And what really cemented it. When I got to Lancaster, you have all of these guys, all of these lifers trying to get out of prison. And they were all doing these programs. And you have this levels of intelligence in prison. You have some guys
Yep.
that are like literally at genius levels, and you have some guys that have, rudimentary educational problems because they never had any of the education. Not to say that they're stupid, they just
Right.
didn't really, you know what I mean, understand the concepts. So I had all these guys, and my judgmental nature, my old me, is looking at all of these guys and judging like, well, this guy's fake and he's just trying to get out. He's not changing his life. This guy's pretty cool, right? You know what I mean? But there was this one guy that I had seen, and there was something about him. You could tell he was just so sincere. Something I recognized in you. I have that
I'm the
skill.
same
You know what I
way.
mean?
I'm the
I'm like,
same
this,
way. Yeah.
this, right, right. I'm like, this is the guy. And I remember going to his set, and I walked up to him, and I told him, hey, dog, I said, what are you doing? What are you doing that's so right, man? I appreciate. I'm watching the game.
I
What are
want
you
what you
doing?
got.
And he goes, man, yeah, you're right, exactly. I want
Yeah.
what you got. I was going over there to get what he got, right? And I remember what he told me. He goes, I don't care about none of this rehab shit. And he literally said it. He goes, I'm a Christian, right? You know what I mean? I'm a man of God. God's changed my life. I'm doing this for problems, but my change has came from God. And I was like, wow, you know what I mean? This is cool. So me and him became really friendly. And he gave me the greatest gift I've ever got while I was in prison. He gave me a Bible, right? So we became friends. We started going to the chow hall together and we started hanging out together. We became really friendly. He was my road dog. That's who I was kicking it with, right? And he gave me this gift. He gave me this Bible, right? And I had the Bible, and it was on the shelf with the rest of my books, and I was going to college at the time, and I was facilitating programs. I was actually running programs. So I was very busy. My whole life was kind of, revolving around rehabilitation and all that type of stuff. And I remember saying to myself, this man gave me a gift. I should use it. So I opened up the Bible and I was trying to figure out where to start. Like where should
Just
I
like
read
me.
this? And even my racial part of me, right? So I went to Romans, right? I went to Romans and I stopped at Romans 5 and I looked at this verse and it said that we boast in our afflictions. And I was like, that is such a huge contradiction. Like, who boasts in their afflictions? Because I'm
Yeah.
afflicted now. You understand what I'm saying? I felt afflicted my entire life, right? So I'm like, who would boast in their afflictions? Then I read the next verse. We boast in our affliction because we learn to endure, right? It brings on endurance. We learn to be able to have to deal with our afflictions when they come, right? You know what I mean? And to handle it the right way. And I'm like, that makes sense because I've endured suffering, how I perceive suffering for well over 2 decades. You know what I mean? And it said that an endurance brings on proven character,
That's right.
right? That's so when you boast in your afflictions, you thank God for these afflictions because you become a person that knows how to endure those things without making those mistakes, right? Without going to the drugs, and without going to the violence, and without doing all of these negative things that the world brings on. And what that does is it brings on proven character. And this was the lot, right? And it says that proven character, right, brings on hope. And this is something that I did not have hope. Right? It brings on hope. Proven character brings on hope, and hope does not
Yeah.
disappoint. And hope does not disappoint. And I was like, and I started to realize that hope is not an emotion, right? It's a gift
Yeah,
from
you
God.
just nailed it.
It's a gift. It's a
Yes.
reward. It's a reward. It's a blessing from God that says, look, I'm going to give you this because everything's going
Let
to
me
be
throw
fine.
this at you.
And that was the
That I
ultimate.
can. Oh yeah, that was awesome. That was dead on right. Hope. When I'm feeling hope, okay, or when I have hope, it's because I'm following God's plan, not mine. I just, that's what you said. I'm following God's plan.
That's it. That's exactly what it is. And it was really in that moment it was really, really a game changer. And then more things happened and
Yeah.
something happened. I started to go back to church. I started to go back to church and there was people in there. There was people in there that were absolutely, absolutely placed there to change
Oh,
my life. I mean, I met these anointed men, these great men of God that you could literally feel it in them. You know what I mean? You could see it in them. You could see it in the
yeah.
light. They are the light. You know what I mean? And I was attracted
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I'm not a child of the dark. I'm a child of a light that lived in the dark for all
Oh,
of
come
these
on.
years. You know what I mean? When I seen it, I was like, this is it. This is where I need to be. This is the direction that I need to be going. And it was, there was so many miracles. There was so many miracles that were happening in my life. And I was recognizing as such. I always thought a miracle was going to be when the sky opened up and God floated down and said,
Yeah.
David, this is what I
Yeah.
require
Yeah.
of you. You go ahead and do that and
Yeah.
everything will be fine. But it
Yeah.
wasn't like that. It was these small
Yeah.
miracles. It was meeting this guy and him giving me that Bible and being able to read that verse. And it was all of these small miracles that God played a hand and played a direct hand in
And
changing
I
my
love
life.
it. And what I'm
And
hearing in you is that today, as because that when we're spiritually connected, and what I love about you and what I hear you saying is that now you're seeing life through God's perspective, not the world or the cultures, right? It's beautiful.
absolutely,
It's
absolutely.
beautiful when I hear that. And it's amazing. So many people are like, clawing and everything like that. You got released. What was that day like?
Right.
Because listen, you were already
God
free.
was
You were already free. You know what I mean? But there's a day that they literally released you. And how'd that come about? Because it's amazing.
well. What happened was I went to the board in 2016, and I had been programming for about a year now. So like all of this stuff that I was doing for a year, and I was actually very good at it. I was one of the
Can see that.
facilitators. I understood the information really, really well. I was able to explain it well in a way that the people would understand. And I became one of the leaders. There was a lot of leaders, but I became one of the leaders in this rehabilitation. So I went to the board in 2016. And they
Right.
recognized it because
Well,
they
you
knew who
see
I
it. You could
was.
feel
They
it
knew
when you
who
walk
I
in.
was then. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I told the truth. I one of the biggest things that I did, one of the biggest things decisions that I made was
Yeah.
to stop lying. I'm going to tell you the truth,
Yeah.
even if it's ugly. I'm going to tell you the truth, and I'm going to tell you the truth to my own perspective, which is usually
Yeah.
objective. Right? You know what I mean? So anyhow, I went to the board, and they like good start, but you have three batteries with a weapon. You have four participations in a riot. You're a validated gang member, right? You know what I mean? You have batteries on staff. You have multiple positions. You had 57 write-ups, right, from 1994 up until 2014. You know what I mean? Good start, but we need to see some more out of you. And this is what we like to say. We like to see this, and we like to see this, and we like to see this. So I took it to heart. I did those things and 10 times more, right? You know what I mean? I started to go to college. I earned two college degrees. I started to facilitate more programs. I got involved in juvenile diversion programs, and I got involved in the prison actors gang. I did all of this stuff. I mean, I just really, really program, in California, what they call programming. And I became really, really good at it. And what was really, really powerful It's with me and you and and Josh and David and Aaron and all of these guys that I've known for years, right? These hardened criminals, right? These hardened criminals, these hardened gang members, and we were in these groups together, and we were talking, and we were telling the truth, and I realized that the sexual abuse that Josh went through throughout his life. And I realized the pain and the suffering that Michael went through his whole life. And they heard my story and realized the pain and the trauma and the suffering that David went through. And I started to realize that, you know what, we're all one. We're all the same people. Right? You know what I mean? So what happened was we were able to shed that shell of a lie, that gang member, that criminal, that junkie, right? You know what I mean? That we were using as a sub personality to try to keep us safe, and actually starting to come out of our shell and be the real people that we are. And so it was a tremendous experience for me, and it prepared me for that day. You asked the question, what was it like when I got out? So I went to the board. I went to the board in 2019. They granted me parole, and I had to. So there's a 5 month waiting period on life is, so there was a 120-day waiting period, and then ironically, I had to do a federal violation because I was on federal parole when I committed that crime. So I got released from California State Prison and met by the U.S. Marshals. They ended up taking me back to
Right.
Brooklyn, right? And I mean, they flew me to Brooklyn, and I had to do a federal violation. I did a short federal violation. They gave me 18 months. I did a little bit over 12, and then they told me to report to San Francisco, and I was free. I was no longer incarcerated, and it was a
Yeah,
tremendous
yeah,
and very
yeah,
scary
yeah,
feeling. You know what I mean?
yeah. It
It
is
was scary.
scary, and wow, I'm actually getting some tears in my eyes because I guess I'm reflecting back because um, some of the most pure, honest, loving men that I've ever met, they're not coming home. You know, they saved my life. I've never cried on the
Yeah.
show, but I learned so much being incarcerated. And you're bringing it back. Because there were men like you that I leaned on. You know, that helped me, and they're never coming home. They did bad things and they meant to. You know what I mean? But they had this transformation. Being locked up. Not these Jesus freaks. But they really. You're seeing a first here on M to the Rock. You're seeing a first here on M to the Rock, and I'm because that world changed my life. You did time. I just got a haircut, um, but I can totally relate to what you're saying, and I can relate to when we're set free. It's scary. The gas of the world hits us, and then we're back into the world. Now that you've been out, because I say this on purpose to some people who, the people around me, they they've never gotten a speeding ticket. You know what I mean? And that they say, I bet you're glad you're out of prison. There are things that I miss about it that I think about every single day. And the one thing that I miss about it is that connection, um, the honesty. But the main thing that I miss, it's the closest to God I've ever been in my entire life because He was all I had. Can you relate to that? Now the gas of the world hits us, and all these things coming at us. Um,
I mean, absolutely. And there's a saying that says that when all that you have is God,
yeah,
that's all that you need. And I'm almost a little bit ashamed to admit this, right? But I had started to know that I was getting out of prison, right? I knew that the day was coming, right? You know what I mean? And I remember my prayer game
yeah,
was open. I would work out, I would do these burpees, and I would constantly be praying. I would constantly be talking to God. I'd be constantly asking to help me,
yes, I remember that.
constantly talking to God all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I
Yeah,
was in a really good mood. I was
yeah,
just felt better, you know what I mean? And I was praying. So then I got out, And it was like, maybe I didn't need God as much. Like, kind of like this is the end game. Like, okay, you know what I mean? I did what he asked me to do, right? I did what he asked me to do, and he granted me freedom. And I realized that, like, no, no. First of all, there's nothing that we can do, right? I mean, there's nothing that we do that's going to make us really kind of acceptable in front of God because we're just,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
just doesn't work that way. You know what I mean? And getting out of prison was not the end game. And I started to realize that because the challenges, these afflictions that we boast in, was still coming, and they're
Yeah.
still coming now. I mean, they're still coming now. There's still challenges, right? You know what I mean? Like when I first got out, I struggled
Yeah.
with technology. It was bringing out my
Yeah.
anger so quickly. Like I
Yeah.
couldn't navigate a phone, and everything had to be done online. You know what I mean? And even order coffee, you had to go to a kiosk. And so I had all this problem, and then I also had this hypervigilance, right? You know what I mean? Like in the environment that I lived most of my life in, you had to know where you was. You had to know who was around you, and do not allow anybody to
Right.
stand behind you. Now remember, I had made a commitment 12 years ago never to harm anyone. And I remember being in the Pete's Coffee. I'm waiting online for a cup of coffee, and this man comes and stands behind me. And I look behind him, and I give him that New York look, like, what are you
Yeah.
doing standing behind me? And I literally frightened this guy. I seen it in his face that I frightened him. And in that moment, I said, "Look, man, you know what I mean? I have to stop this. This, you know what I mean? Like, the rules don't apply. Things have changed now. So I have to adapt to my this new
Yeah.
environment. You know what I mean? To this new environment. So I was in the same place I was when I asked God for help the first time. Now I needed help to be able to navigate in a whole new environment, this whole new world, all these new rules and all these new people. It expanded so much. One thing about prison is that it limits your choices and
That's right.
decisions. You know, there's always been a difference between a
Right.
choice and a decision, right? You know what I mean? You know, a choice is just an option. The decision is the one that carries the consequence, whether it's, you know,
Yeah.
whether it's good or whether it's bad. And so from coming from a place that has so few options to now this overwhelming amount of options, and my fear kind of kicked back in. Am
Yeah.
I gonna make the wrong decision? You know, there's everything, you know what I mean? I wanted to make sure that I did everything right. And that fear just kind of
Yeah.
ignited a lack of faith. And I started to, you know what I mean? I started to, like, all right, God's got me, and I'm good now. And now I'm going to go back on my own. I'm going to navigate this on my own. And I know that that's the wrong path to
And
be
that's
going. Right? You know what I
recovery.
mean? Like, what, you know?
That is this new way of life after being born again. Is that now you recognize it, right? You recognize it,
Right.
and now
Right.
you go, okay, well, and you go back to the source instead of looking for resources,
Right.
right? And it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful,
Absolutely.
sharing that, and so much in this. This is one of the we were supposed to meet. You know what I mean? And it's just so cool, and it's amazing. Let's have some fun real quick, okay? And I want you to come back on. There's so
Okay.
much more we need to talk about, and we're going to end. And by the way, I shared with you, on the phone. Um, there are a lot of inmates who are incarcerated right now that are listening to this show. As you know, M2 The Rock is on every tablet in every jail and every prison in the entire country. And so it's going to be great for them to hear this content. But some questions that people ask me, and I know the answers is, starts out with tattoos, prison, tattoos and getting, you know, um, how did they make, how did they do tattoos where you were at? How did they make the ink?
Well, so well, the ink is usually made out of burnt plastic, right? So they'll get some chess pieces,
Styro-
or they'll get
styrofoam cups?
maybe a piece of a handball,
Yep.
styrofoam cups, all those type of things. And what they do is they set a flame, and then take a brown paper bag and put it over flames. So what happens is the soot rises to the top, and you get this black soot. When the fire is gone, you'll scrape it down, and you'll have this kind of black soot. And you take just a small amount of black soot, and they would use shampoo, just a tiny drop of shampoo, and mix it 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 and mix it, and it turns into an ink. And I mean, I'm heavily tattooed. I haven't had any tattoos
Right.
since the '90s, right? You know what I mean? But it's a very effective method. I mean, don't get me wrong. Every now and again, you'll get some real tattoo ink that a cop will bring in,
Yeah.
like some black cat or something like that, but it's rare. You know what I mean? To get really, really good ink. There was people that were using um, jet ink from the printers, right? So, because some people have access to like captain's clerks, and you know what I mean. They do have printers that are in there, and they would use those. But that ink I found wasn't
Yeah.
that
They
good. But that's how they
have,
create
and
good
then
ink.
they and the guns, like they said, how do they put it on you? And I mean, I have mine, but it's lining up.
The guns were made mostly, but my time they were from cassette
Uh,
players, right? So you used to be able to have Walkmans, and there was radios that had cassette players, and they
yeah.
would pull the motor out, right? So they had the motor, and they would set a barrel, usually
Yeah.
a pen filler. So they would take
Yep.
a barrel from a pen, they cut it down, right? You know what I mean? They would
Hmm.
fashion a tip, you know what I mean? And then they would connect the motor to the barrel of the pin. And most of the needles were six strings from guitars. There's always, you could always have either personal guitar or there's band rooms. And the six string, the thickest one, if you unravel that, there's a very, very thin piece of wire in the middle, and they would cut that, and they would sharpen it up and bend it and fit it into the machine. You could
Yeah.
also use a spring. So like from a big lighter back in the days, they stopped tobacco in 2005, but before that, you had access to lighters, and you could take a spring and heat it up and actually stretch it out, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And turn it into a needle. So the needles are very, very thin, which takes
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot more work, right? So it's not like on the street they have
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
these 7 needle
Yeah.
shaders.
Yeah.
They can come in and shade it all there. Not so much in prison, right? So it's a much more painful process.
So
But
a lot of it was similar to us. It
that's how they
was
would make the tattoo guns.
they would burn styrofoam cups, and then they would mix it in hair grease. The hair grease. Same concept. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
great
and
works,
then
right? Big
the
oil.
needles. If they could get a staple, or if they could get a paper clip in, they would wear that out and they'd file it down on the stairs. Going to second row. On the stair. That's how we did it. Very, very similar to that. And then it's like got my bricks. I said I wanted to fit in. I got a great gang story. So with my transformation in there, and the tank came together, and I became tank boss. And I'm in this ag tank, and my name was Rabbit. Look out, Rabbit. And so it was funny because we had the gangs in there, and they said it gets to where you have some fun, and I said, you know what, and I was at a level where I wasn't getting too comfortable. I mean, we can talk about that, and you see when those guys would
Right,
come in,
right,
they'd be scared to death, and they grow and they start getting too comfortable. They get checked, or they get the brakes beaten off of them. So there's that fine line, when you're doing
right.
time. But there was a time after night chow, I interviewed each gang to see what I wanted to join a gang. And it was comical, So I'm interviewing with the Bloods, the Crips, the Tango Blast, and the Woods, and all this stuff. And and then at the end they said, "Who do you want to join?" I said, I just can't do it. I'm just going to stick with God's gang. You know what I mean? Just stupid stuff. So we have funny stories in there. And then the MacGyvers of prison that, I mean, they take a trash
Oh
bag
my
and turn
goodness.
into jewelry. I mean, the things that I saw, what people could
Right,
do with nothing.
right,
And so
right,
it's just a great
right.
Brooklyn. We're gonna. This has been one of the greatest shows. I mean, you made me cry. I've never cried on this show, but it was a good cry, and we're going to have you back on a lot. And the reason why I want you on a lot is because I want these inmates, these hopeless inmates that are listening to this, to hear you still being that coordinator, still being that leader. I'm doing the same thing. I'm still reading to people in the way that we do it. For the men and women who are listening to this, who are locked up, and they're doing hard time. And hard time is when we're in our head, okay? And we learn how to do easy time,
Absolutely.
and yours was just like mine. We start serving. Instead of fighting, we start serving, being a service to our fellow inmate, right? Without looking messy. But what's your message to those ones who are listening right now?
Well, this is what I could say, and I appreciate you because we're selling
Right.
hope, not dope, right? You know what I mean? And really, the end of the day, there's so much power in prayer, right? You know what I mean? And when you
Yeah,
know,
I'm not
I'm
either.
not the religious type and be like, oh, you have to do it this way
No.
and Bible dumping.
Yeah.
No, talk to God, talk to God, right? Vent to God, get mad at God, right? He's our Father. That's what He's there for. Let all of your fears, let all of your needs, right? You know what I mean? And even if you don't know how to articulate it, just talk to God, right? It's gonna make you feel better, right? It's gonna make you feel better. And when you feel better, you're gonna start to head in the right direction because there's always a direction to move. Even if you think you're in a hopeless spot, you're not. We're selling hope, not dope.
Amen.
I
And one
promise you.
thing for the people who are incarcerated, listening to this, I have a suggestion. If you're feeling down and depressed, you feel hopeless. One thing that worked for me, I'll never forget it. After I was dope sick, and I started to read to Ooh-wee. I will never forget this. I cannot wait to see your reaction when I say this. Okay, when I sat up and I made my bed for the first time. I had just a blanket, but I made it neat. I tucked it in, made it look good. I cleaned up my box. I just kind of organized my box. And I had this feeling of my self-esteem. I felt a sense of accomplishing something. Start right there. Just start right there. Make your bed today. And oh, this is great. Brooklyn, I love you so much. And this has been such a great experience. And where can we find you? I know you're on TikTok. We will have your TikTok page on all of our stuff to point people to your direction. Do you have Instagram? Okay,
No, I don't. My only
perfect.
media outlet right now is TikTok. You know, I spent so much time in prison. I don't know
Gotcha.
the technical side of these things. You know what I mean? So I don't. So the only thing that I have at
Perfect.
the moment is TikTok. So you can find me at Brooklyn Freeman
Great. And
on
in the
TikTok.
description, we will have his link to that. And then throughout the show, right now our editor probably just dropped in a picture of your page to follow you and go listen to this man. And he provides a lot of hope. Brooklyn, I'll never forget this. I saw um, give me. Do you do sign language? Show me. Do prison
I
sign
do.
language for "I love you." Wait, we can't see you. Go more to the middle. That's okay.
I'm sorry.
Beautiful. Perfect. That's so perfect. We'll have a show on that.
I haven't used that method
Right. But I
of
also remember
communication in a
this. I heard a
long
guy say
time.
this one time on the phone he was talking to baby mama, right? And he said 381. And I said, man, what's 381? He goes, 3 words, 8 letters, one meaning. I love you. From all of us here at M2 The Rock, go make it a great day. Make sure you subscribe to this channel to get more comment and leave comments of what kind of topics you want us to talk about. And also in the comments, if you have any questions for Brooklyn David, we will forward that to him. And subscribe and share this out. Share this out. And in order to keep the show going, your donations for M2 The Rock services that help people to get help for anything. And also to keep the show up and going, to provide guests like Brooklyn and to send hope to the hopeless. Everyone, it's been a great one. Brooklyn, we love you once again. Everyone, make it a great day.
Love you back, man.